Konnichiwa, everybody. Good evening, and welcome to this presentation about Shinto, the indigenous religion of Japan. As world religions go, Japan's indigenous religion is not as well known as many of the more widespread ones. When we talk of Christianity, Islam or Hinduism, we will often get an image straight away in our minds, a kind of intellectual shorthand of what that faith is all about. But what is Shinto? Well, to sum it up in a sentence, Shinto simply means the way of the gods. And there we are, we can all go home now. But if you want to go a bit further though, as I hope you do, some of you who are interested in martial arts might have heard of the term Bushido, which means the way of the warrior. In the same way, Shinto means the way of the gods, or more specifically, the way of the kami. Kami is the traditional Japanese understanding of what a god is. But before we dive into that and explore what these kami are, let's talk about why we're even having this talk in the first place. This began many years ago when I was in theology college. I remember then that one of my lecturers said to the whole class that pagan or polytheistic societies, which is societies with many gods, can't be successful. His reasoning was that because such religions lack hierarchy, they don't promote social cohesion, while without the mitigating force of a priestly class, the society eventually tips into extremism or anarchy. Meanwhile, a lack of formal theology means no philosophy, no structured way of understanding truth. While polytheistic, cyclical views of time cause stagnation, as opposed to monotheistic religions, which see time as having a conclusion, causing a more goal-oriented society which is able to make progress. In Christianity, we think of the return of Jesus, in Islam the Day of Judgment. Even in Buddhism, there's the idea of striving through lifetimes to attain nirvana. The lecturer said that these ideas of an end of history caused their societies to strive, but were lacking in multiple god societies like sub-Saharan Africa, India or Dark Age England, which caused those cultures to be quite content to stand still. And so the lecturer laid all this out, and then I thought of Japan. Because Japan, to me, kind of gives the lie to all of that. Japan is a land of balance. It's one of the most technologically sophisticated countries in the world. And yet it's held on to this ancient polytheistic faith, Shinto. Today, about 90% of Japanese people will say they believe in Shinto. Around 50% say they believe in Buddhism. These are two very popular religions, but Shinto is the one most widely practiced in Japan. So let's look at how this plays out in Japanese society. For many people, the most visual representation of a culture can be its flag. And when you look at the Japanese flag, what do you see? A red dot on a white background. That dot represents the sun. Japan is often called the land of the rising sun, and the Japanese referred to the sun on their flag as the lucky sun. But that sun also represents Amaterasu Omikami, the chief goddess of the Japanese pantheon. Yes, the chief deity is a goddess, and she is the goddess of the sun. And the Japanese people have her sun, her symbol, right there on their flag. I think that's kind of cool. You've got a goddess front and centre on the national flag. And at the same time, Japan is also a country of futuristic technology. Think of the Shinkansen, the bullet train. It's a world record holder, and the Japanese didn't stop with the records they set in the 1960s. They've continued to innovate and break those records again and again. Even in the last 5 years, new Shinkansen models are still setting records and travelling at speeds many aircraft would envy. Yet walk into any Japanese city or community and you'll find somewhere a jinja. What is a jinja? A jinja is a Shinto shrine. You'll recognise them by their gates, the torii. These are usually made of wood or stone, always from natural materials, never artificial. Inside the shrine is the place where the kami of that area or aspect of life resides. Kami can represent all kinds of things, and we'll look at that in more detail soon. In front of the torii, in this picture, you can even see a small kami house, a little home for the god. I think it's kind of lovely to have a physical place for that aspect of nature to be respected and honoured. Here's another example of a kami. Can you spot it in this photograph? It's absolutely massive. It's in the background. It's Mount Fuji, or Fujisan. It's a sacred mountain and considered in itself to be a kami. In fact, Fujisan is also known as Konohasakuna Hime, the kami of childbirth, and I apologise if my pronunciation is poor, as I suspect it was. Anyway, you have these ancient beliefs, and then just as you can see in this picture, this ancient belief about Fujisan being a kami, and then just in front of it in the foreground, Tokyo, the world's largest urban area. And the whole stretch of southern Japan from Tokyo to Kyoto to Nagasaki is one continuous megacity. And here's the thing, the Japanese do this intentionally. When we think of Japan, we often think of people being crammed into dense cities. But many people don't realise that around 70% of Japan is actually pristine wilderness, and they want to keep it that way. Even back in the Tokugawa period, they were passing laws to protect forests and nature. And today, the Japanese choose to live in dense cities because they want to leave nature untouched, because nature is kami, and living in harmony with kami means respecting nature, respecting the land. Another feature of this harmony are attitudes to the kofun you can see here. These ancient keyhole-shaped tombs you see here looking down from above. We have burial mounds here in the UK. You'll often see them lining the crest of a hill. In Japan, these kofun are believed to be the tombs of early emperors. And here's a really interesting thing. No one is allowed to excavate them. They're still deeply mysterious to this day. And the Japanese have a deep reverence for the dead, especially the emperors. So even if a kofun sits in the middle of a dense city, as we see here, it's left untouched, preserved for wildlife, for the spirits, for quiet. And I think that respectful attitude is really beautiful. And yet, at the same time as this stillness, Japan is also bursting with creativity. Just look at anime, it's hugely popular worldwide. Later in the talk, we'll explore how Shinto ideas play out in anime. But even now, think about shows like Ghost in the Shell, and how they explore ideas like consciousness, family, anonymity in modern society, or even the transference of the human mind into machines. Whereas in the meantime, Hollywood is reduced to recycling the same old franchises time after time with formulaic plot lines, and seems more concerned with ticking boxes than exploring our world and the human condition through art. Japanese animated cinema is fresh, it's bold, and it's tackling brand new questions, not just repeating old stories, even in films which are suitable for all ages. And I love that. And at the same time, they never lose touch with their past. Take the Mikoshi festivals. Once a year, at a Mikoshi festival, the kami is brought out of the shrine and taken through the streets in a little kamidana, like the one here in this photo. The people pull it along, and as they go, they'll often have drinks, sake or other alcohol, and get merrier and merrier, and the procession might wobble a bit, but it will get to its destination, and that's absolutely fine, because the wobbles are all part of the celebration. Showing respect, yes, but also joy and community and fun. And festivals like that will happen in every Japanese community, in the same way that we would have a village fete or a city carnival or gala. In our next slide here, this is what it looks like inside of a jinja. The most common religious buildings in Japan are jinja, which are Shinto shrines, as opposed to pagodas, which are Buddhist temples. You can usually recognise the two because a Shinto jinja will have a gate at the front of it, and a Buddhist pagoda will be built kind of tall and thin. Anyway, inside the shrine you'll find intricately carved wooden buildings, decorated lanterns, priests playing music, and Miko dancing. Miko is a shrine maiden. These shrines are often run by families and are passed down through generations. They're kept meticulously clean and often surrounded by trees and greenery, even in the heart of a city, creating pockets of serenity and spiritual connection with nature in the busiest and most hectic of places. So far, we've talked about shrines and Japanese society, but not much about what Shinto actually is. So let's come back to that now. Shinto is Japan's indigenous religion. It's not imported, but it arose from the Japanese islands themselves. It was first written about when writing first came to Japan from China, but it had existed for untold centuries before that point. It has been practiced from prehistoric times right up to today, with no break in its continuity, and I think that's amazing. So, Shinto believes in the kami. But what are kami? Kami are the gods of Shinto, but they're not gods in the way we usually might imagine in the West. In Christianity, Islam or Judaism, God is often thought of as the one supreme being, overarching and responsible for all of creation. In Japan, the concept is very different. Kami are everywhere. The sun is a kami. The mountain is a kami. Even an object like a sword can have a kami. Aspects of life can also be kami. There's a kami of luck, a kami of learning, even a kami of anime and printing. Kami are in nature, in your home, in every aspect of life. And so, in Shinto, humans have a responsibility to respect and celebrate the kami, which means respecting nature and living in harmony with it. Shinto is not an exclusivist religion. This means it does not claim to be the only correct religion, the only way to God. That's why, as I mentioned, 90% of people in Japan might identify as Shinto, and 50% also as Buddhist. There's no conflict. You don't have to pick one and exclude the other. At the same time, Shinto is distinct from Buddhism or Bushido. It's not just another version of them, but it's also not opposed to them. A Shinto priest might still follow Bushido as a martial artist, or draw on Buddhist wisdom. The goal is truth through harmony, not theological correctness through conflict. Now, here's something interesting. Even though 90% of Japanese people follow Shinto customs, most surveys show that they say they have no religion. Why is that? Because in Japanese, the word for religion is the same as the word for brainwashing. And so if someone with a clipboard comes up to a Japanese person and asks, "Excuse me, sir, what is your religion?" they're actually asking, "Excuse me, how are you brainwashed?" Which is why most people, in response to these surveys, naturally say, "I'm not brainwashed." And so people will say that they're not religious, but they still follow the ceremonies and customs, and may even have the beliefs of Shinto, or Buddhism indeed, or any of the other religions represented in Japan today. Now, let's look at some examples of Shinto in Japanese society. Here we see a Shinto ceremony in action, in this sumo ring. Does anyone here watch sumo? Anyone here ever seen sumo? In sumo, before a bout, wrestlers throw salt into the ring to purify it. The referee is a priest, and the whole ring faces a kamadana, or guard shelf, a place where the kami are. The reason the whole sumo tournament is also a religious ceremony is because sumo began as a festival to thank the gods for the rice harvest, and the kami enjoy entertainment. So what better way to thank and entertain the kami, and also incidentally the community, than by throwing a wrestling tournament in their honour? Next we have a couple of cute children going to a 3-5-7 ceremony. We'll come back to that later, but pretty much all children in Japan today will undertake a 3-5-7 ceremony. It's another example of how the traditions of Shinto are very much alive in Japanese society today. This gentleman here is Emperor Naruhito, the current emperor of Japan. And this is a photo of him at his coronation ceremony. The Japanese coronation is quite brief and a very poignant ceremony. And importantly, the emperor is always enthroned through a Shinto ceremony. And in Japan, when a new emperor is coronated, the year resets to 0 and a new era begins. The name of the era being chosen by the new emperor. So we are currently in the year 2025, but the year in Japan is Reiwa 7. Historically, emperors or empresses were even considered to be kami in their own right. Some early texts like the Kojiki describe the emperor as a kami, a divine being. Today though, that view has changed. The emperor says, "No, I'm not a kami, I'm just a regular person, but I'm happy to fulfill the role." So much like here in the UK we have a constitutional monarchy, it's a similar setup in Japan. Now here's a different scene. These people are standing on a platform in a railway station, and they are about to clean the Shinkansen before the next passengers board. And what are they doing here? The bullet train is entering the station, and they're bowing to it. Why are they bowing to it? Because they are showing respect for the kami of the train. In Shinto belief, objects can have a kami, and work itself can have a kami too. In Japanese society, there's a strong ethos that if you're going to do something, you put your heart and soul into it. And if you do that, if you dedicate yourself to your work, then a part of your spirit becomes part of the thing you've worked on. And that gives the object a kind of soul, a kami in its own right. Think of something like the bullet train. So many people put care, passion and precision into designing, building and engineering that train. And all of that emotional and spiritual investment gives it a kind of energy, a presence. So of course it would be respected. Of course it would possess a kami in its own right. Bowing before people as well is another custom associated with Japan. Here in our culture, we shake hands sometimes when we meet someone. In Japan, the custom is to bow. And there's a social etiquette to this. Japan is in many ways a traditional and fairly hierarchical society. Now, as a foreigner, you wouldn't be expected to know exactly where you sit in that hierarchy, but a respectful bow is always appreciated. And the general rule of thumb is this: the lower down the pecking order you are, the lower and longer your bow should be. So if you were to meet this gentleman here, the Emperor, you would give a low and courteous bow. But even as a lowly gaijin, you could still expect him to extend a bow back to you. Because in Shinto, the bow is not just a formality, it's a way of honouring the spirit of the person you're meeting. And that's the whole point of the bow, to recognise and honour the spirit, the kami, in others. Shinto is very different from a religion like Christianity. It doesn't have formal doctrines. It doesn't take strong moral positions on many issues, at least not in the way Western religions often do. It doesn't have holy books in the same sense, but it does have the Kojiki, a collection of traditional myths and legends. The Kojiki functions a bit like the Bible does in Christianity. Not in the sense that it's taken by anyone as literal truth, but as a respected collection of shared and ancient cultural stories that shape the national imagination. They're revered not because people necessarily believe every word happened exactly as written, but because they are great profound stories passed down from the ancestors. And now, to give you a flavour of the Kojiki, we'll have a read of the creation story at the beginning of the Kojiki to give you a sense of what it's all about. All was chaos before the heaven and the earth came into existence. All was shapeless mass. Something light and transparent rose up and formed the heaven. The world resembled oil, floating, jellyfish-like, upon the face of the water. Then the heavenly deities were born. They were likewise born alone and hid themselves. It took millions and millions of years before the earth was formed. like the sprouting of a reed, many more deities were born. Then Izanagi, the male who invites deity, and Izanami, the female who invites deity, were born. All the other heavenly deities summoned Izanagi and Izanami to consolidate the world, handing them a spear. Standing upon the floating bridge of heaven, Izanagi and Izanami pushed down the spear and stirred the brine till it went curdle, curdle. The brine that dripped down from the spear piled up and became an island. Wishing to be married, the two deities descended to the island and found a pillar. Izanagi questioned Izanami, "How is your body formed?" Izanami replied, "My body is empty in one place." Izanagi proclaimed, "My body sticks out in one place." "I would like to thrust the part of my body that sticks out into the part of your body that is empty." And I think we'd probably best leave Izanami and Izanagi there. I think you will agree with me from this that Shinto is a sex-positive religion that celebrates human as well as natural fertility. We could talk more about how this influences Japanese sexual ethics, but that would make this a very different kind of presentation. Anyway, I'll hand this book around. You're very welcome to have a flip through it if you want to find out what happens to Izanagi and Izanami. It's a translation of the Kojiki by Kazumi Wilds and published by Total Publishing. It's got some beautiful artwork in there as well, so I do recommend you have a look through and enjoy the illustrations as well as the text. So, we've heard how the world, or at least the Japanese islands, were created according to Shinto. Next, let's take a look at the history of Shinto itself. I say let's as if you're all choosing this with me, but I'm the one giving the talk, so I'm in the driver's seat. Still, as long as you're happy to sit there and keep listening, this is where we're going next. The Kojiki goes on and goes into a lot more than just myths. It also tells the early history of the imperial family of Japan, who came from the Yamatai clan. But the first individual in the historical record of Japan was a woman named Princess Himiko, shown here in this illustration. Princess Himiko was recorded by the Chinese as the first Empress of Japan, and it was her who set the archetype to the Japanese for what an emperor should be. This is something that stands out and is very different from how we in the West often frame origin myths, is that Princess Himiko was not a warrior, but a shaman. She united the Japanese tribes around her, not by force or conquest, but by spiritual means. Her husband was a warrior, but her role was very different. She lived in seclusion, mediating between her people and the spirit world. She was said to communicate with the kami on behalf of her people. Now, if we think of the origin myths of our country, we might think of figures like King Arthur. Arthur is our model of the ideal king. He takes up the sword, defeats enemies, and keeps the land safe by strength and force. In many ways, he's the prototype of what a ruler should be in our mythology. But in Japanese culture, the ideal ruler isn't a warrior king. It's the ideal set by Princess Himiko, someone who united people spiritually and sought prosperity for them by maintaining harmony with the kami. To do this, it is thought that Princess Himiko founded Ise Jinga, the Grand Imperial Shrine of Japan, located near the Kai Peninsula, and still one of the most important sacred sites in Shinto today. She's recorded as living in a palace with 1,000 female attendants, which only one man, her husband, was allowed to enter. We don't know how he fared in that arrangement. It isn't recorded whether he enjoyed being the only man in the palace or whether he ended up quite henpecked, but we can imagine. Now, having a female empress wasn't unusual in early Japan. The Kojiki records both male and female emperors right up until the arrival of Buddhism. And with Buddhism came a shift. Alongside it came Confucian ideas from China, and with those came the view that men should be in authority. And so Japan gradually moved away from the practice of having female emperors. But it wasn't always that way. In the beginning, Shinto was the only religion in Japan. It was closely tied to the role of the emperor, whose main duty was to maintain harmony between the people and the divine. The emperor administered shrines, ensured rituals were kept, and preserved the balance of nature and spirit so that the land and society could flourish. But that changed around about the 550s, when Buddhism and Confucianism were introduced from China and Korea. With Buddhism came new philosophies, rituals, and religious personnel, and before long conflict emerged between traditional Shinto families and the new Buddhist influences. In particular, there was a famous clash between the Soga and Mononoke clans, one supporting Buddhism, the other defending traditional kami worship. Eventually, though, the emperor provided a resolution that sought to restore peace to the land and maintain harmony. Rather than declare one religion right and the other wrong, Japan chose to integrate Buddhism while at the same time maintaining Shinto. They found a compromise. Wherever a Buddhist pagoda was built, a Shinto shrine would be built alongside it. That way, it was thought the kami could protect the Buddhist temple. It was a clever compromise, one that allowed both religions to complement each other rather than compete. And this arrangement continued for over a millennia, even into the era of the military dictatorship of the Tokugawa shogunate. But then came the Meiji Restoration in 1868, a major turning point in Japan's history. For hundreds of years before that, the emperor had effectively outsourced his authority to the shogun, a military dictator who was head of the samurai and ruled in the emperor's name. Much like our monarch in Britain delegates power to the Prime Minister, the Japanese emperor had remained a symbolic figure, while the shogun held the real power. But that changed dramatically when in 1853 black ships appeared in Yokohama Bay. These belonged to Admiral Perry of the United States Navy, who came to insist, not request, that Japan open up to trade with his country. The Japanese at that time were quite content with their isolationist policy and had no great interest in further trade, but Perry made it clear, telling the shogunate, "I will go away, but I will come back, and when I return, I will bring more ships, and you will be ready to sign the treaty." Faced with the overwhelming Western military technology, the Japanese knew they had a choice to make. Decisive action was needed, but the shogun, for all his authority, proved unable to act decisively during this crisis. And in fairness, it was an impossible situation. But his failure to act created a power vacuum, and into that vacuum stepped Emperor Meiji. This emperor, who had lived in seclusion in Kyoto, emerged the first time an emperor had in centuries to reclaim imperial power. He gathered an army of peasants and marched on Tokyo and ended the shogunate. He restored the emperor's direct control over Japan. And then came the real transformation. Emperor Meiji sent delegates all over the world to study how other nations worked and bring that knowledge back to modernise Japan. He sent delegates to Britain to learn about our railways and our navy. He sent delegates to France and Germany to study how to organise an army. To America to understand how to build a modern economy. Japan would remain Japanese, but it would no longer be isolated. And so the delegates came back to Japan with all the knowledge they'd gathered, and Emperor Meiji got to work. He began to implement what they'd found and started to transform the country, modernising Japan so that it could compete with the foreign powers that had turned up at its shores with vastly superior technology. They succeeded. But while all this was going on, the Meiji Emperor was also busy reorganising Shinto. Emperor Meiji wanted to distance the renewed imperial state from the Buddhism favoured by the shoguns, and instead reasserted Shinto as the core of Japanese national identity. He wanted the Japanese people not just to practice Shinto, but to see themselves as Shinto. At first, that simply meant putting more focus on shrines, festivals, and rituals. But over time, things became more extreme. People were no longer going to shrines because they wanted to. They were told it was compulsory. You had to go to the shrine. You had to give your children a Shinto name. You had to attend a 357 ceremony. It became less a religion of personal choice and more something you were required to do as a Japanese citizen. Eventually, the government of Japan even introduced a policy called "Every Citizen a Warrior," which, to be fair, is more in line with Bushido than Shinto. But the point remains. If every person is a warrior, what do you get? My son got this right away. That's right. If every citizen is a warrior, you get war. And war did come. And we all know what happened next. The Japanese made a colonial empire of their own, which brought them into conflict with others, and brought to the shores of Japan the devastation of the Second World War and the dropping of the nuclear bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Japan surrendered. And after that, everything changed. State Shinto, as it had existed during the war, was dismantled. In the years that followed, Japan became very wary of any kind of central authority or organisation trying to unify Shinto again. And that's why even today Shinto is not structured as many Western religions are. There's no pope, no archbishop, no caliph, no central authority, no one person or council that tells everyone else what to do. Instead, each shrine governs itself. Often, shrine duties are passed down through families, with the responsibility of caretaking moving from one generation to the next. And for the most part, that system has worked well in post-war Japan, There are a couple of central institutions, one that trains priests and another that promotes Shinto understanding abroad. But even these aren't compulsory. Shrines aren't required to join or contribute funds or to train priests if they don't want to. There's still a sense of distrust even today of anything that feels too controlling or too centralised. And that's a direct result of how Shinto was handled before the war. And so that brings us up to modern day Japan and its attitude towards religion. And religious freedom is a big deal there, and the Japanese government is very cautious about legislating anything that might interfere with it. In fact, the assassination of the Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe in 2022 was connected to exactly this sort of issue, tensions around religious groups and the question of whether cults or fringe movements should be protected under religious freedom laws. So, all that gives you, I hope, a picture of how Shinto has developed through Japanese history, from its ancient roots to its reinvention in the Meiji period to its decentralized form today. Now, next let's look at how Shinto approaches life's big questions. Because as we all know, there are two things in life that are certain: death and taxes. Although personally, I think more people turn to religion for help with death than they do for help with taxes. What does Shinto say about what happens after we die? Well, unlike some religions, Shinto doesn't offer a single clear answer. There are a few different ideas, and they often exist side by side. For example, some people believe that when you die, your spirit might travel to a place called Tokyo, not to be confused with Tokyo, the city. Tokyo means eastern capital, or land where the sun rises, and it's thought of as a place beyond the horizon where the sun rises from the sea. Others believe in ancestral spirits, that the spirits of the dead stay in this world, particularly within families, and watch over their descendants. There's also the idea of Takamagahara, a sort of heavenly realm or upper world, high above in the sky where the gods dwell. In some rural traditions, there's the idea of a mountain paradise, spirits going to reside on sacred mountains, possibly originating from the practice of burying the dead on mountaintops. And in the Kojiki, we also hear of Yomi, a shadowy underworld where the dead return to Izanami, who we read about earlier, the mother god and creatress. All of these sit alongside another belief, that the dead, after around 50 years, can become kami themselves. But during that 50-year waiting period, it is the duty of the family to pray for them and maintain their memory. This is where things like the kamedana, the home shrine, come in. It's common for Japanese households to have a kamedana, and the role of looking after it is usually passed from father to son. Each day, the family will pray at the shrine for any relatives who have passed away in the last 50 years. Once that period is complete, it's believed that the ancestor has fully become a kami, and that the daily prayers are no longer required. But the respect doesn't end there. Once a year, many families visit the graves of their ancestors to clean the gravestones and offer prayers. Here in this photo, you can see a grandmother and grandson doing exactly that, a quiet moment of connection between the past and present. Next, turning to anime. Because Shinto often pops up in popular culture too, I want to share a little moment that really moved me. There's a scene in Porco Rosso, a beautiful Studio Ghibli film set just after World War I. The main character in this film is a fighter pilot who's been in a dogfight, and during the battle he blacks out. And in that moment he has a strange and powerful vision. He sees his seaplane floating on a cloud of mist high above the world. I'm actually getting goosebumps telling you about this. He sees his seaplane suspended on a layer of white mist like a cloud. Above him, the sky is a bright, endless blue. And then, slowly rising up out of the mist, he sees the planes of his comrades, and even the planes of his enemies, all rising together. One after another, they ascend quietly and purposefully into the sky, joining a great procession of aircraft from many nations, rising together to form a kind of bridge to the afterlife, heading towards Takamagahara, the upper world of the gods. It's one of the most moving depictions I've seen of the Shinto idea that death is not a punishment, but a return to something greater. There's no judgment, no weighing of the soul, no test to pass. In Shinto, death is a part of the natural cycle. There's no hellfire, no heaven, no tallying of sins. Just a transition, something we all go through together as humans. Now, let's take a look at this next image. It's our UK Combined Forces rugby team, and they're standing with shrine attendants outside a Shinto shrine during a tour of Japan. At first glance, it might look like a lovely cultural exchange, and that was absolutely the intention. But this photo is actually extremely controversial. Anyone here know why? No, it's not to do with their ethnicity. Japan is generally very open to people from all backgrounds visiting shrines, providing, of course, that they're respectful. No, the issue here is that the specific shrine they're visiting, this shrine is dedicated to the Japanese war dead, and all the war dead are venerated here. For us, and for the rugby team pictured here, we will probably think of this as the Japanese equivalent of our cenotaph in London, or the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier. So why would this act be controversial? And it's because in Shinto there is no judgment, and this shrine is a place of respect for all the Japanese war dead, not just the ones who served and died honourably, but every soldier, including those who may have committed some very barbaric acts, particularly against the civilians of Korea and China. And so, for people from those countries seeing this, it hits differently. It can feel very deeply offensive, as it's seen as honouring the people who caused such immense suffering and harm to their peoples. And it's a powerful reminder that even a faith like Shinto, rooted in peace and reverence, can still cast a shadow. And that sometimes, as appealing as a lack of judgment about the afterlife might be, this lack of judgment can itself bring its own problems. I apologise if that bit's a bit heavy, but I didn't want to skip over that because I think it is important to talk honestly about both the beauty and complications of this tradition. So, moving on, let's look at Shinto and the environment. And the environment is something vitally important to a Shinto understanding of the world. As I mentioned earlier, Shinto venerates the kami, and kami are found everywhere, literally everywhere. In trees, rivers, mountains, professions, animals, directions, even in types of work. There are kami of love, war, luck, plague, printing, fishing, and so on. And there are also what are called mononoke, mysterious spirits or energies that inhabit the natural world. Now, some people might translate mononoke as demons, but that's not really accurate. A better term might be nature spirits, kami that don't fit neatly into good or evil categories. We'll talk about a few of them now. One example is the kitsune, the fox spirit. Kitsune are shapeshifters, often appearing as beautiful women, but they can be mischievous or even deadly. There's also the tanuki, a kind of magical raccoon dog known for causing harmless trouble and general trickery. The nekamata is another type. It's a cat that's lived, and the idea is that when a cat has lived for 100 years, it develops supernatural powers, eventually growing multiple tails and becoming a kind of cat kami. And then of course, dragons. In Japan, dragons aren't usually fire-breathing like in Western myths. Instead, they're associated with rivers and water, often depicted as long snaking beings winding through the land, just like a river does. Because the natural world is so filled with kami, Shinto teaches a deep respect for the environment. Did you know that over 70% of Japan is forested? Before building on a site where the land has not been used before, developers will always hold a ceremony to ask the kami's permission, apologise for the disruption, and acknowledge the spirit of the place before any construction work is allowed to take place. Japan is also one of the most recycling compliant nations in the world and a global leader in green technology. And Japan often gives away pollution reducing technology. Many of us will have heard about the coal-fired power plants being built by China every week. Well, when these are built, Japan donates to China coal scrubbers and offers to help install them to reduce environmental damage. So, the Shinto religion has given Japan an ethos to help and promote environmental healthiness around the world. Going back to the kami, let's look again at this photo and we can see Fuji-san. And do you remember earlier that Mount Fuji is a kami? It is a living spiritual presence in its own right. And so are the grasses in the foreground. The goddess of long grass, in fact, is one of the most important kami in modern Japan. She is the kami of business. Why? Because rice is a type of long grass. And rice, of course, was historically the foundation of prosperity. And so, over time, this goddess, Inari, became the goddess not only of harvests, but of trade, prosperity, and success. Inari is one of the most important kami in all of Japan, an example of how the role and character of a kami can evolve and change over time, adapting naturally as society changes. So, going back to our Mononoke, the spirits of the land and countryside, these are spirits that dwell in the deep countryside and might be unfamiliar with humans. This one here is a kappa, a water-dwelling turtle-like spirit. They're a bit dangerous actually. Kappa have been known to eat humans. But don't worry, there's a way to defeat a kappa if you ever meet one. You see, despite being man-eaters, kappa are very polite. And if you bow to a kappa, it will bow back. But the kappa survives by keeping a bowl of water balanced on top of its head. And if it bows too low, the water spills. Without it, the kappa dies. So, when it bows, the water will fall out and you will be saved. So, if you ever find yourself walking in the wilderness and come across a creature like this, just remember that. It could be useful. Sometimes in rural villages, You might see people wearing red demon masks with long noses. These represent Tengu, angry mountain spirits who are said to snatch away naughty children. Parents will sometimes tell their kids, "Behave or the Tengu will get you." And once a year in some places, adults dress up as Tengu and march through the streets, scaring the children as part of a local festival. Probably less fun if you're a child. But as I keep reminding myself, I'm not a child. At least not physically, although I'm sure my wife might say otherwise. So, as you can see, Shinto is a religion full of respect. Respect for the land, for the spirits, for other people. Shrines can be as tiny as this little one here to a fox spirit, just a few inches tall, or as vast and awe-inspiring as the shrine of Mount Fuji. And everyone is valid. Every shrine is sacred. Next, we're going to look at Shinto ceremonies and how they compare to some that we might already be familiar with. Let's start with marriage. Most of us have been to a wedding at some point, right? Some joyful, some perhaps with a bit of family drama, but we all know what one looks like. Now, in Shinto, weddings tend to be more intimate than many of the big white weddings we might traditionally expect here. There's no father giving the bride away, and the couple doesn't enter separately. Instead, the bride and groom enter together, often led by a miko, or shrine maiden, who assists with the ceremony. The couple and their guests are purified and they bow before the kami. Only the couple and their parents, or two other witnesses, are required to attend, so it's a small and sacred affair. The bride or groom then makes their vows before the kami in the presence of the shrine's god, and they share sake together as a symbol of their union and becoming one. They raise the sake cups to their lips 3 times, but only drink on the 3rd time. It's a ritual of acceptance and unity. They also offer something called a tamaguchi, not to be confused with a tamagotchi. A tamaguchi is a sacred branch, usually of sakaki, with white folded paper attached. Kami seem to like them. Why? I'm not quite sure, but it's one of the most traditional offerings in Shinto, and you find it happening quite a bit. And once all that ritual is done, the guests drink together to symbolise the joining of the two families. And let's be honest, no good ceremony is complete without a drink at the end, is it? Now, earlier I mentioned the 357 ceremony, or Shichigo-san in Japanese. This is something that almost every child in Japan will go through, and it's the closest Shinto has to something like a christening. Until quite recently in the UK, most children, even from non-religious families, would be christened as a way of welcoming them into the world. The 357 ceremony works in a similar way. So why those numbers? Well, age 3, traditionally, was when a child would have their first haircut, and from then on grow their hair as part of maturing. This is the first presentation to the kami. Age 5, because for boys, this was the first time they get to wear adult clothing, and they're brought again to the shrine. And age 7, because for girls, was the first time in formal dress, and their turn to be presented. So boys are brought to the shrine at the ages 3 and 5, and girls at the ages 3 and 7. During the ceremony, the child offers a tamaguchi, prayers are said for the child's health and happiness, and the child receives a protective charm called an omamori. Here in the photo, we see an aunt trying to wrangle a child during the ceremony, something I remember well from my own childhood and weddings, at various christenings and things like that here. As a child, all you want to do is go and play, and there's your family trying to get you to pose nicely for a photo. That's my memory, and I connected it with that picture, which is why I chose that here. You can see the little bag she's holding, the aunt, might well contain an omamori, which are often brightly coloured with symbols of protection, luck and health. And this is what they look like. There's also Children's Day in Japan, when families fly koi-shaped streamers outside of their homes. Why koi? Because koi, or carp as we call them, are seen as a noble, strong fish that can swim upstream against strong currents. So these streamers are a wish for the child. May you be strong like the noble koi. May you be able to swim against the current of life and reach your full potential. It's a lovely tradition, and when you see koi streamers fluttering in the wind over rooftops and rivers, it really gives you a sense of the values behind it. So, our next section we come to now is Shinto in pop culture, or as my subtitle says, okay, it's mostly anime. But I do think it's fascinating to see how Shinto shows up in the shows people watch, the stories they tell, and the stories that we, even outside Japan, now enjoy through that culture. One obvious example, to me at least, is Studio Ghibli. And a warning to you, there are spoilers ahead, but even knowing these things, I still thoroughly recommend every film mentioned here. This verse still is from my Neighbour Totoro, a film I used to watch all the time with my son when he was little. In it, these two girls you see move to a rural area and meet Totoro, a forest spirit, and develop a relationship with him. In one scene, Totoro is helping trees grow, and the two children, Satsuki and Mei, go out to help him. They're not afraid because Totoro is a kami who looks out for them. When Mei first tells her sister she's seen Totoro, they go and speak to their dad. Now, in a lot of stories, the adult might say, "Oh, nonsense," but not here. The dad takes his daughter seriously and says, "Ah, yes, you've seen a forest spirit. We should go and introduce ourselves." And so the family visits the tree, bows respectfully, and thanks the spirit for revealing himself. And you can even see in this picture the tree is wrapped with a sacred rope with paper folded charms on it, just like a formal shrine. So the local community in this film would already have known that Totoro's tree was sacred. Another Ghibli film that touches on Shinto themes is Grave of the Fireflies. Now, Grave of the Fireflies is a very different film to My Neighbour Totoro, even though the two were originally supposed to be released together. Imagine that double bill. Totoro is gentle, hopeful, and is almost a whimsical film. But Grave of the Fireflies is heartbreakingly sad. It deals with the post-war period in Japan, where there is widespread starvation, poverty and displacement. Totoro is a film I used to watch quite a lot with my son. Grave of the Fireflies is not a film I've allowed my son to watch yet. But at the end of that film, Grave of the Fireflies, we see the two children, the film's main characters, now as ancestral spirits watching over the city that's been rebuilt after the devastation. And they look on with quiet satisfaction, as if to say, we suffered, but we are glad those who came after us didn't have to. And I think that's very touching and very Shinto. Because in Shinto, the spirits of our ancestors remain with us, not in a metaphorical way, but as real presences in the world. They continue to take an interest in how we live and whether we build something worth passing on. This next slide is a bit lighter, and this is from the film Pompoko, which is a sort of Japanese version of Animals of Farthing Wood. And it's about a group of tanuki, or raccoon spirits, whose forest is being destroyed by property developers, and these tanuki are trying to stop them. Now, according to Japanese folklore, and I promise you I'm not making this up, the tanuki have the ability to enlarge their testes to normal proportions. And yes, I said testes, and yes, they can even use them as weapons. So in the film here, this tanuki is here seen swinging his giant testicles like a club to fight off the developers trying to pave over his home. And yes, I see that smiling, I hear that laughter. It is absolutely as ridiculous as it sounds, but it is based on genuine folklore, and it shows how these spirits are often tied to the land and will go to great lengths to defend nature. I'll take a drink now. So, moving away from anime for a second, here's a picture of the band Baby Metal. Now, they have quite a unique style of music, a blend of heavy metal and cute J-pop. But what's interesting in this context is that they regularly reference the fox god in their music, interviews and performance, and they're doing so here, of making their hand symbol, and they're also wearing fox masks on the side of their heads as well. But they're making this fox sign with their fingers, and Western media usually treats their references to the fox god as a gimmick. But after learning about the kami and how fox spirits or kitsune are a big part of Shinto belief, you start to wonder, hang on, maybe they're being serious. Maybe they actually believe in this fox god, and they believe in the mission the fox god has sent them on, a mission to spread joy, energy and love around the world. And honestly, all power to them. Knowing what I know, I don't think this is a gimmick. I think this is something that they believe, and fair play. Going back to Ghibli now, because I can't stay away from it. One of their most famous films is Spirited Away, and this scene here is from the Spirit Bathhouse, a place where kami go to be cleansed after contact with the pollution of the human world. And we see in this film, this spirit here in this image arrives caked in filth, oil and mud and all sorts of things, and the staff at the bathhouse mistake him for a stink spirit and try to turn him away. They shout, "Go away, we're closed, you can't come in." But he pushes through and settles himself into a bath, and when they start to clean him, they realise he's not a stink spirit at all. He's actually a river kami who's become so polluted that he's forgotten who he is. And they pull out old bicycles, tyres, rubbish from his body, and by the end of the scene he's restored, and he rises out of the water and flies away as a majestic dragon. It's a beautiful allegory, not just for environmental care, but for restoring spiritual identity through compassion and cleansing. Something that in Shinto can be done very literally through cleaning and maintaining natural spaces. Another part of that same film follows Chihiro, a young girl who befriends a boy named Haku. Over the course of the film, Haku gradually remembers who he really is. He's the spirit of the Kahaku River, and he saved Chihiro from drowning when she was very young. This relationship between human and kami, forged in love and gratitude, a reciprocal relationship, is exactly the kind of harmonious connection that Shinto sees as ideal. An ideal I thought was quite touchingly expressed in this picture. Another Ghibli film I want to mention, as it bookends Princess Himiko quite well, I think, is Nausicaa of the Valley of the Wind. This film is set in a post-apocalyptic future, but it represents a princess, Nausicaa, who reminds me of Princess Himiko, the shamanic ruler from Shinto myth. Nausicaa doesn't rule by force. She's a spiritual leader, interacting with the spirit world, with nature, and especially with the toxic jungle that threatens humanity. Rather than trying to conquer it, she tries to understand and make peace with it, bridging the human world and the spirit world. Just like how Princess Himiko united her people through seeking their prosperity through harmony with nature. There's even an old king with a shamaness advisor, echoing the ancient role of shaman and woman in Japanese court life. And finally, there are some anime that mix Western religion and Shinto in fascinating ways. One thing you notice is that in these stories, they often don't make the same distinctions we do. You might see a character who's a nun and a witch at the same time. There's a sense that both roles, whether praying in a church or casting spells, are interacting with the spiritual world, and therefore spiritually valid. So when we in the West sometimes think it's strange that Shinto and Buddhism coexist so peacefully, Japanese viewers might think it's strange that we assume religions to have to compete at all. And I think that's a very interesting contrast. It gives us a lot to think about when we reflect on how different societies imagine the sacred, and what kind of world they want to build through it. And so, concluding now, you'll be pleased to know that you've made it all the way through, and we're finally coming to the end of this journey together. What can we learn from this exploration of Shinto? What can we take away from a religion and worldview that might seem very different from our own, but has endured and shaped an entire nation for centuries? First and foremost, it reminds us of the incredible diversity of human belief and practice. How people find meaning in the world around them, how they relate to nature, to the divine, and to each other. And that alone is valuable. The more we understand the beliefs and traditions of other cultures, the more we know of the world, the better informed we are, and that can benefit us in all kinds of ways. But beyond knowledge for its own sake, I believe Shinto teaches us something deeper and profoundly relevant for today. As I said right back at the beginning of this talk, one of my former lecturers, a truly wise and kind man, once told us in his class that a society needs a monotheistic religion to thrive. That success depends on belief in one God, one unifying divine authority. And while that may have been a truth discovered by many communities, Shinto and Japan's rich history offer a powerful counterexample. A society can thrive with many gods, many spirits, many ways of worship. A society can succeed through harmony, coexistence, and a fluid relationship between the spiritual and natural worlds. Not through rigid doctrinal dogma, but love, respect, and ongoing dialogue with the sacred in everyday life. This matters because in our modern world, full of rapid change, technological marvels, and increasing social pressures, there is often a false choice presented to us: progress or preservation, science or spirituality, the future or the past. And Shinto gently whispers to us that we don't have to choose. that there is a way to walk forward while holding on to our past, to embrace innovation and technology while nurturing a deep reverence for the natural world, for the sacredness that pulses beneath the surface of our everyday lives. It calls us to remember that the earth is not just a resource to exploit, but a living, breathing web of sacredness to be respected and honoured. And we have our part in this web. We are not separate from it. If we honour that which creates and supports us, we affirm our connection to all life. If we can learn this balance between tradition and progress, between respect and innovation, then we and our communities can truly flourish, not at the expense of the planet, but in harmony with it. And so, as we close this talk today, I invite you to carry with you a little piece of Shinto's wisdom, that we can live in a world where technology advances and forests grow, where cities rise and rivers run clear, where progress and sacredness walk hand in hand, and that all kinds of societies can succeed. And with that, I want to say truly and sincerely, arigatou gozaimasu. Thank you so much for listening.